Hello, everyone. I believe that's 3 o'clock. So we will start our next panel, which is PropTech addressing the fundamental requirements of the real estate industry as part of the Oxres 2021 conference, Property and the Pandemic, Panic or Progress. Sorry, got my tongue tied a bit there. I'm Andy Saul. I'll be moderating this panel. Brief little introduction about me. I studied sustainable urban development at Oxford, and I research as part of the Future of Real Estate initiative at SCI Business School. So I have a fascination of the fundamental issues and how technology can overcome them. They say necessity is the mother of innovation, and real estate and construction are arguably two of the biggest industries in need of change. Fortunately, investment into PropTech and construction has been growing exponentially over the past 5 years. And many agree that the pandemic has accelerated its adoption within the real estate industry. But despite this, we still have global housing shortages, carbon-intensive construction and operation, problems of affordability, inequality, and now a global workforce more willing to work from home than their own offices. Has this accelerated technology adoption been the result of a wider market panic, or does it reveal the true progress towards a more equitable industry? Fortunately, I'm joined by a wonderful panel, and I'm not the one who has to try and answer those questions. What we're going to do today is we're going to set up a two-sided debate with two prominent European PropTech venture capitalists, Faisal and Valentina, and two of the industry innovation experts in Abigail and Josh. So to let the panel introduce themselves and to talk about their position within this debate, I'd first like to introduce the team arguing for PropTech addressing the fundamental issues of the real estate industry, Faisal and Valentina. Faisal, if you'd like to go first and introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Faisal. I'm the CEO at Pi Labs. We're a very active investor in the PropTech space. Started out investing in the UK, now we're investing across Europe and globally, and looking forward to the debate today.
Thank you, Faisal. Valentina?
Hi everyone, my name is Valentina Shagoyan. I'm managing partner of Reach UK. I personally find this debate extremely interesting because I come into technology world from having a career in real estate for 15 years. So I was in real estate investments, real estate financial advisory, and for a while was watching finance and fintech with a lot of curiosity, seeing how technology managed to change the industry for better. And I jumped the fence about 3 years ago when PropTech just started emerging. And now I am an investor into real estate technology startups. And of course, I believe that PropTech has already made a lot of good to the industry.
Great, thank you. And on the opposing bench, hoping to argue against the proposition that PropTech is addressing, so they're on the PropTech is not addressing the fundamental requirements of the industry side of the debate, is Abigail and Josh. If Abigail, you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Abigail Dean, and I'm Head of Strategic Insights at Nuveen Real Estate. Nuveen Real Estate is one of the top 5 global real estate asset managers. We have about $130 billion worth of real estate assets under management in the US, Europe, and Asia Pacific. And my role is heading up our teams that are looking at sustainability and ESG, research, innovation, and PropTech. So looking at all of the different trends and factors that are going to have an impact on real estate value in the long term and near term as well, and advising our investment teams on how to incorporate those issues into investment decision making. So PropTech is a really important part of what we look at, and I'm excited about engaging in the debate today.
And Josh?
Thanks, Andy. I'm Josh Pittman. I spent about 12 years in real estate in various aspects, real estate, finance, trading, CMBS. And about 5 years ago, I jumped over to academia. One of the things I realized from my work on Wall Street was that there's a lot of potential in this industry, and there are a lot of things that can be done, but there's also a lot of complexity and difficulties. So now I'm an adjunct professor at NYU and Columbia University as a former director of real estate technology initiatives in the engineering school at Columbia. I'll soon be moving over to the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Business Analysis and FinTech in the engineering school at Columbia. And we focus on looking at some really the more fundamental and foundational aspects of real estate and how we can improve that. We work with large real estate companies, large banks, and look at their problems, how they make decisions. And we try to find ways that we can use cutting edge technology to to address some of those concerns and help them make decisions in a smarter way.
I think the audience will agree we've got a wonderfully, hopefully balanced debate with 4 industry experts here willing to give their opinion. I want to jump straight in, and I'll begin with Faisal, if I may, and the team arguing for PropTech. Would you like to suggest some of the fundamental issues that you believe PropTech has addressed, is addressing, and will in the future address in your 6 years of in the industry so far?
Well, it's a really broad question, and I'm going to try to zone in on a couple of key focal areas. So one of the big areas of focus for us is sustainability. It's something that we're hearing a lot from the large real estate groups, how this has risen to the top of the strategic agenda for most of the major institutional real estate owners. And we have taken those problem statements, turned them into research topics, which we're actively researching, and we're very actively investing in that space. So there are really concrete examples I can give you. There are companies such as Demand Logic, which is one of our portfolio companies, that is working with large real estate owners like Grosvenor or LNG to help them reduce the energy consumption in their office buildings and thereby reduce the carbon footprint of these buildings, which of course is like a fundamental problem in real estate right now. So there are some very focused solutions that we are investing in, but equally there's other perhaps other areas that are equally important in a different way, which is around making the workplace safe and promoting buildings that are centered on health and well-being of the occupiers. And we're investing in technologies that can help promote that through technology and analytics. So we have a company called 720 Degrees based in Finland, which is a data analytics platform specifically focused on indoor environmental quality and how it relates to worker well-being. So those are the 2 that I'll highlight today as key problems that we've identified and are actively investing into.
Great. I'll let your debate partner Valentina add anything she wishes there.
Thanks, Andy. Answering the question whether PropTech is addressing key fundamental issues, I would first want to distinguish between PropTech as technology, as a tool, and PropTech as startups, new businesses. So what is challenging is that startups and new businesses, they do need effective demand. And real estate as an industry historically has been a laggard. So I still remember my days in the industry. It was kind of very customary to do things how you used to be doing them and not really challenging the status quo. So for startups, it has already been difficult enough to break through and into the industry and trying to kind of increase the adoption rate. They have to address what's the burning pain points of real estate. And quite often those are the ones that just probably because of the real estate is also commercial business, those are the ones that tackle either the top line directly or cost optimization and then ultimately bottom line. Through that, luckily, there are some fundamental issues that play into this category. So of course, anything to do with energy efficiency, what Faisal mentioned just now, that helps with cost optimization and then kind of by nature attracts interest from the industry and helps the adoption rate. Then another fundamental issue of this industry is the speed of transactions, be it residential or commercial real estate. And there are a number of great solutions which are now emerging and being heavily utilized by the industry. So one of them, for example, is in our portfolio, is the company called Offer. Then there is a lot of demand for data and data analytic tools. And that is kind of, again, it's making sense that those solutions are emerging and they help addressing this fundamental issue of data kind of concentration within certain bubbles and within real estate, and real estate being so like historically known for data silos and data inefficiencies. There is a great company that also is in Reach 2021 called Sprift, and I think Faisal mentioned a couple of examples now as well. But just because there is a need for effective demand and demand generates supply ultimately, there are a number of undersupplied fundamental issues within real estate, which are kind of harder for startups to tackle, but PropTech tools are there. So I would argue that there are PropTech tools available to address certain areas, but those will be more kind of, like, I'll give you concrete examples. Fundamental issues of real estate will be pollution, outdoor air quality, and then to a certain degree, gender inequality as well. So we know that real estate has been blamed historically for being a male's like old boys club. How are you going to tackle those with PropTech? If those are, again, they're more in the category of public goods where the whole of the society would benefit, but there is no stakeholder who is prepared to pay for it out of kind of personal pocket. But then even with that, I would argue that PropTech is being utilized, and I will give you an example of land registry. So land registry obviously works, they have a great initiative called Digital Street, and they utilize blockchain as a tool to kind of help with digital registry development. And they also have another program called Geovation that they're backing. So ultimately, when it comes to the public good category, I would argue that it's harder for PropTech businesses to tackle those and for VCs like us to back them as a result. But there is still a lot of optimism coming from the government side and public body. And it's great to see that Nuveen has an innovations team in place. So I'm sure that Abigail has some positives to say on that as well.
Valentina, you did a great job of arguing the side against PropTech for the second half of the speech. So I'm sure Abigail and Josh will say thank you. So just to summarise the position that I kind of took from that, Faisal mentioned that PropTech's addressing environmental sustainability, social sustainability. Valentina mentioned the fact that data is addressing the sustainable governance issues in the industry, and she kind of turned it back on real estate, saying PropTech has to be a financially viable investment. And it, in fact, is the real estate industry that are not demanding these solutions. It's not the PropTech's market's fault for not addressing them. So Abigail, Josh, if you can either answer that or open with your own statements, and then we can get into a full-on debate if people are taking notes and have some burning issues that they want to raise. I'll start with Abigail.
Thanks, Andy. So I think that there are a number of fundamental issues that PropTech is attempting to address at the moment, but I'm not sure that it's actually addressing them in the right way. So if we start with sustainability and if we look at it on a building level, so some of the solutions that Faisal mentioned, such as demand logic, that they are really great technologies, and we use them in some of our buildings, but they only take us so far. So the problem that we have in a typical building as a landlord is that we can only access the bit of the building that we take responsibility for, where we're purchasing the energy. What we're not able to do is have a solution which enables us to look at all of the tenant energy use and connect with how they're using energy and come up with a holistic building solution. So largely we're looking at quite a small piece of the pie there, and the tenants are all, especially in a multi-let building, they might have a floor or half a floor. They're not really motivated to look at the energy consumption in a meaningful way. So we have a fundamental problem there, and I don't see any PropTech solutions that are really trying to tackle that quite knotty, difficult issue. So they're going for the easy bit, which is the landlord-controlled energy. They're not going for the more challenging bit, which is the whole building. And you can see the same on data collection, because you want to have the technologies to enable the buildings to be super efficient. So demand logic effectively works by highlighting where things are on when they shouldn't be, and when things are working harder than they should. So you can save quite a lot of energy doing that. The other thing you want to do is be properly monitoring the consumption in buildings, and having a look at how they compare to other buildings. Again, we have great insight into landlord controlled energy, and there's lots of great PropTech solutions out there which will help you get access to that data and analyze it in a really impressive way. Not very much there which enables you to tackle that really knotty problem of how do you get access to the tenant's data, and how do you aggregate that, how do you make sure that's accurate. So there's a big part of the problem there that I feel that PropTech is largely just ignoring, because it's too hard of a problem to solve. Then if we look at it from the other perspective, thinking about the impact that climate change has on buildings. So for us, we want to make our buildings as efficient as possible so we can solve part of the climate change problem. We also recognise that that climate is changing and we need to protect our buildings from that and understand how vulnerable they are. Some really interesting solutions out there which take climate models and look at, well, what impact is that going to have on a building in this particular location over the next 10, 20, 30, 100 years. But what they will do is say, this is what the impact on value is from the damage to the building. Now, the damage to the building is only you're only looking through quite a narrow lens there. What they can't do is tell you, or what's the impact going to be on liquidity? What's the impact going to be on rental growth? What's the impact going to be on insurability? And whilst I think there are some in the industry trying to solve that, and we're working with some of our PropTech partners to answer some of those problems, it's not the easy solution. So I think a large number of the PropTech solutions providers in that area are avoiding tackling that knotty problem. And then the final one I'll point to is the kind of harnessing of big data sets to help you understand what real estate markets might be doing in the future. Clearly a huge potential there to help you get better investment decision making if you can harness these external data sets. And I think the situation we're in at the moment is a lot of these data sets being thrown at people in real estate, but they don't necessarily have the knowledge, the skill set and the understanding to be able to do anything with them. And that piece of work that's needed to turn those data sets into something that's really usable by the industry, to provide the skills and the training for those working in the industry to be able to work with them, is still a little bit lacking. So what I would say as a roundup is that PropTech is aware of some of the issues, but I would say that at the moment maybe still going for the easy wins rather than really addressing those fundamental issues.
Thank you. And we'll tag in Josh.
All right. Thank you, Abigail, for giving me lots of ammo to jump on top of, and Valentina a little bit as well. A couple of things I'll circle or come back to what was already said. I think what Abigail said about many of these companies attempting to address some of these problems is absolutely true, but addressing effectively is not happening. I think one of the issues that we're having is that a large portion of the startups out there are backed by VCs. And this isn't a knock on VCs, but VCs have certain timeframes and certain things that they look at to invest in companies. You have to get to revenue fast. Most funds are closed end, so you have to get probably an average of 7 years. That's very difficult to do when you're trying to build a business and also build this capability on top of. And Abigail mentioned these companies are often going for the easy outcomes, the more simple outcomes, not addressing the more foundational and challenging issues. But that's because it takes 5 to 10 years to develop the kinds of technology and capabilities to address these more fundamental issues. And that doesn't blend in well with a VC's timeframe. So these solutions are focused on narrow applications. They're focused on getting to revenue, getting to market, not building the more fundamental capabilities. And that does lead to problems, that leads to challenges, especially when you start getting into the bigger, more established real estate companies that have really complex systems. Abigail also mentioned the big data as applied to market analysis. That's really what these companies are looking for. Many of these startups are pushing solutions that are, if they're effective, they're incremental improvements. They make a little difference here and a little different there, but they're not producing any kinds of transformations or disruptive technologies. And that's the hype that's out there, is that there's all of these startups are disruptive, they're transformative, and that hasn't been the case so far. So I think that's a large part of it. The other part is that many real estate companies have zero technical or technological knowledge in-house. They don't know what they don't know about the technical side. Many of the startups were founded by people that come from a technology background that don't know anything about the real estate side. Bringing those two things together are very challenging. It's been challenging for us. When we work with companies, when we look at some of the things that they want to do, it's been good for us because the companies that we work with are the few that have really strong technical teams in-house. And we can have good conversations with them. They understand the data issues. They understand that the models, the AI, the machine learning, what they run on, how they run. And we can get to outcomes, but we can't get to good outcomes. We're confident that we feel accurate because there is a lack of data. Most real estate companies don't have that kind of technical background to understand it. They don't understand how to use the technology. They don't understand the technical side of it. What is machine learning? What is this algorithm? They also don't understand how to use technology strategically. And most executives are looking for things that are incremental, things that they can generate a 3 to 6 month return on. And that's hard to do. That's very difficult to do when you have the balance of the way that VCs are funding startups and the outcomes that they're looking for, and the things that real estate companies are looking for. Real estate companies are looking for big outcomes, but they don't want to pay too much for it, and they don't want it to take very long. It doesn't work that way. So there has to be, I think, a fundamental shift in how executives look at technology, how they adopt it, what kinds of, how they look at taking their time, spending the money, and making sure that they get to the right outcome. And that's hard to do when you don't understand the tools that are being used. And on the technology side, it's very difficult to understand the industry well enough and the problems in that industry to build effective technology to address those issues.
Great. So just to summarize what I've got here, that Abigail spoke about how, you know, technology cannot impact regulation. It is not yet utilizing big data to create accurate forecasts and future models. We heard that how the venture capital time horizons and poor funding going into the industry is actually blocking disruptive technology, and ultimately how real estate doesn't understand the fundamental issues that technology can solve, and technology doesn't understand the fundamental issues of real estate. Valentina, Faisal, which one of you wants to jump on that and come back at Abigail and Josh?
There's a lot there. Valentina, you can go ahead first if you want. I've got a couple of points as well.
I have very simple answer to this, and it's sort of overarching to many of those topics. It's the stage of PropTech as an industry. So it's still at the stage where their adoption rates are not where we want to see them within the real estate. And PropTech as an industry is what, as a term, as 3 years old, although some solutions, they exist for a decade long already, but they've been classified as PropTech relatively recently. So I would say that those are all fair observations, but that's only a matter of time, and that doesn't mean that PropTech and technologies available are not addressing the fundamental issues of the market. It just also their industry needs to be given time. And that then breaks down to those various observations which we raised. First, and that's where, Josh, I would challenge you a little. I actually don't think that real estate as an industry looks for holistic and broad solutions. I would actually say that what I see from the market and in my conversations with real estate practitioners, they do actually appreciate and understand better incremental solutions. Because what I've heard historically a lot from real estate industry is that innovators, when they try to sell them too much, they are perceived and they immediately the door is immediately shut because they are seen as not actually understanding the business. And real estate is a complex industry. And indeed, there are a lot of innovators who come from the outside of real estate. There are a lot of fintechs, entrepreneurs who serve PropTech. So if innovators and real estate PropTech startups, they try to solve the holistic problem, like instead of, for example, providing the digital notarization or digital signatures, they say we can close the whole transaction for you, then it actually closes the door quite quickly. So it's sort of, and there are a lot of low-hanging fruits within real estate, and those are still fundamental issues as well. And that's where, Abigail, I would probably challenge you slightly. Solving the low-hanging fruits, solving the incremental inefficiencies is not a bad thing, and that's where it normally starts, and that helps the adoption curve as well. And Andy, that's something where I'm going to quote you and PropTech Oxford research, where you showed this bell curve of adoption, and real estate is still far behind many other industries. It's still at those early adopter stage, to be frank. And then on the VC point, I think VC capital is just first to explore this this field and to have more sustainable financial backing for real estate PropTech startups. You've got to have corporates to kind of carve out bigger budgets to support innovations. And that's, Abigail, I'm going to quote a stat from your yesterday's panel, where it was mentioned that one of those like 300 million funds had 10K per annum allocated to sustainability solutions, which is just sort of, they're basically ticking the box, right? So you've got to have some meaningful percentage of your assets under management allocated to innovations to make a meaningful impact. And that's what we are missing to start backing more longer term solutions. And we in VC world, our hands are tied by what our LPs demand. So of course, we're going to be a little bit more kind of medium term investors rather than like investors for decades. But that's basically will be my speech in defense.
Thank you, Valentina. Just to back you up, I'm going to address Abigail's point first around aggregating tenant energy use and getting whole building data versus just the landlord energy data, which she described as the naughty problem. I think this is where accelerators actually come in. So you often you try to understand what the problem is that hasn't yet been solved by a credible technology that's already out in the industry, and the accelerators are there to get in at ground zero, communicate that a problem statement exists, and there isn't a incumbent who's actually grown within the space, and to be able to attract founders at the earliest stage and to be able to invest in them. So the whole purpose of accelerators in the market is to actually go out and find startups for problems that haven't been solved for, which it seems like, Abigail, through your various interactions with tech companies, you haven't yet found a credible startup that's solving for the tenant aggregation of tenant energy data problem. We'll certainly take that one away. Just touching on some of the points brought up by Josh around VC backing and the timelines associated with it. Well, the ecosystem for funding for startups has matured in countries like the UK, and I'm sure in the US, you do have R&D grants that allow startups to really build the R&D out for deep tech or complex technologies for a longer period of time before VCs get on board, because VCs, as you said, usually are a closed-ended fund. Fund term is usually 10 years, etc. So you need to have some kind of outcome within 7-8 years. But there are other forms of funding out there, and any good VC investor will be well plugged into the different sources of funding to be able to help a startup through its entire life cycle, right? And then your point around real estate companies not having technical teams, I think if you compare real estate to all the other major industry sectors, I think you'll agree that it's probably ranks lowest in terms of R&D spend and tech R&D spend. But that's exactly why real estate companies are now partnering with tech VCs. It's almost a way of externalizing your R&D, because there's, in the near term at least, we don't see real estate companies spending any significant amount on tech R&D in-house, but to enter into strategic partnerships and basically bringing technology and property minds together is where it's at that intersection that great things happen. And we see these types of collaborations happening all the time, where a tech founder who may not be from the property industry but has a great technical team is married up with somebody from the real estate industry who can open up doors and also be a sounding board to help build a product that the industry really wants. And that's something that we really focus on. So of course, these are all problems that you've identified, but there are solutions. And that's the reason why I would argue firms like Pi Labs and Valentina's firm exist. It's to bring these two worlds together and for it to result in successful prop tech company outcomes. Because neither the tech startups have all the skills that's needed, and neither do the real estate companies. And you need to create kind of a breeding ground to cross-fertilize between the two worlds.
I'm willing to let you guys just answer immediately rather than me stepping in the middle now. So if you do have direct comeback to Josh, Abigail, jump in and fire away. If not, I can throw some more questions to you all, because there's certainly a lot to get coming through the questions, the question function as well.
I suppose just two quick points I would make. One is, I think one of the real challenges that PropTech hasn't overcome yet is how to scale up its solutions. So we'll often have the situation where you have technologies that you could deploy in either individual buildings or in can meet certain use cases, and they work. But then the challenge of taking that from a pilot building or a pilot portfolio, scaling it up and applying it across a complex portfolio, which in our instance would normally, our portfolio will be held across multiple different fund structures. So it's not as straightforward as saying we're a company that owns all this property, we can roll it out. It's not like that. It's 80 different individual companies almost. So being able to take a technology and get it to scale, taking into account the different leasing structures that you might have, the different ownership structures, that is something which I think that the PropTech solutions haven't quite been able to tackle yet. Now, I think you could fairly argue that that's for the real estate people to solve that problem, but but I think really the two have to work better together to enable that to happen, and there needs to be some deeper thought on the PropTech side to really understanding how to overcome some of those scale issues. So I think that's definitely something that needs to be addressed before this can really start to make a huge impact on the industry. And I suppose linked to that is the huge time commitment that is needed by those working in real estate in order to really adopt these technologies. And there's certainly a skills gap there, and the amount of knowledge, time commitment that's needed to devote to this, I think that's probably more of a barrier than the financial commitment, actually, because a lot of real estate companies are often quite people light. They're reliant on a huge network of others in the industry providing the different agents and property managers and designers, and the people at the center of that often you don't have huge numbers of people. So really having enough people that truly understand how these technologies work and the data analysis techniques is a big barrier to really getting this to work. So I think again that's a problem that lies between the two sides, but I think those are two quite critical issues that need to be addressed before we see PropTech actually being used consistently to address some of these fundamental issues.
I'm conscious, Abigail, that you are now arguing the point that PropTech is addressing the fundamental issues, and it's in
trying
fact
not to.
So Josh, maybe you can bring it back on topic and give Faisal and Valentina a piece of your mind. I can see you charting in the corner like a box already.
You guys are going down now. So a couple of things. First, I am not knocking VCs. I think VCs play a very critical role in pushing out technologies. The problem is that R&D should not happen in VCs. That's not the place for R&D. R&D happens in labs. It happens with these government grants. It happens before that. Those new technologies then get to VCs. VCs partner them with growth, with good entrepreneurs, good teams. They help them grow into a company that takes 5 to 7 years to get there, sometimes 10 years to get to that place where VC can then say, this kind of growth potential is what we're looking for in order to meet our investors. I do not think that real estate companies, corporations should be funding VCs as their way of performing research and development. There should be research and development happening in the corporate side, whether that's academic labs, whether that's working with consultancies, looking at places like DARPA or Bell Labs for things that come out. Once those are identified, then they are either spun up internally or they're sent to VCs, and VCs can do what they do well. I don't believe the VCs do well when there are 100 VCs and every single one of them is funding the same kind of ubiquitous technology that does the same thing with slightly different points for these different companies. VCs should do what they do well. And I don't think that the real estate industry is giving VCs what they need to do in order to grow those kinds of companies that will be impactful and transformative. So that's where I think the problem is on that side. And that falls, in my opinion, squarely on the real estate companies not being willing to put forth the R&D. Part of that is the fund structures. Many of these companies are based on funds. They're not based on corporations like Amazon or some of the others that have a lot of funds they can put towards research and development. So that makes it difficult for these funds to put out. I think the other thing is the culture, though. Real estate does not have a culture of research and development. They don't look at things for 5 or 10 years and accept that it might take that long before they start getting a return on their money. The other thing, Valentina, goes back to the real estate companies as well. They are looking for incremental. And then they're frustrated because they're not getting things that are transformative, but they're asking for things that are incremental. I had someone say once that often technology decisions, and not just in real estate, but in any industry, are made at the lowest common denominator of understanding of that technology. And when you have companies that come in and say, we can use deep learning to give you a much better market analysis tool that isn't an immediate outcome, but it will be a fundamental capability that you can make better decisions off of for the next 5 or 10 years and grow a strategy off of. Real estate companies don't want to hear that. They want to hear, what is my return going to be over the next 3 to 6 months? Rather than looking for these big transformations and these new capabilities and fundamentally new ways of running the business. They're not asking for that. And that's where that lack of technology experience on the real estate side comes in. That's where the lack of willingness to fund these longer term ventures and take risks and explore and experiment with things that might work. Many other companies do that. They might succeed 1 out of 10 times, and they're okay with that because they understand that's the innovation process. Real estate companies, in my opinion, and in my experience, are not okay with that. And that makes it hard. When you're solving many of these problems that are bigger, that are more transformative, more holistic, they are very, very hard to do. The data availability in real estate is horrible. It's dirty data, it's incomplete, it's not granular, it's not local. But many of the problems that these real estate companies want solved, as Abigail said, and need solved, are granular, they're local, they're hyper granular, they're hyper local. They require a lot of data. When you look at AI and machine learning, it's all math, it's not magic, it's mathematics. And you build this algorithm, even if that algorithm completely accurately represents the problem that you're trying to solve in the real world, you still need the right kind of data to put into those algorithms to get the right kind of answers. You can build algorithms and give it dirty data and you're going to get dirty answers. And that's a lot of what we're seeing out there. But pushing these technologies out in a way that they are complete and accurate and valuable to the companies has not been done yet. And that's not necessarily a problem with the startups. That's a problem with the information the startups are getting. It's often a problem with when you come from a technology background, not knowing that granular data is important. When you come from a real estate background, not knowing the fundamentals of developing tech, how difficult that is. It is super hard to do that. And we're seeing that with many of the projects that we work on, that really solving these fundamental problems. And we run into walls often. This data that we know we need in order to solve this problem, to get to the kind of output or explanatory information that we need, is simply not available in the way that we need it. And it's very difficult to solve that. But there are companies out there that are pushing those solutions based on that incomplete data. Real estate companies are seeing that and they're saying this doesn't work. And it's almost like putting your hand on a stove. These real estate companies are faced with hundreds of companies that are trying to pitch and sell their products. They look at them, they don't work, and they get leery to answer those emails and have those other meetings. So I think that's one of those problems there. And Faisal, your point about bringing the sides together, I think that works really, really well. When you have a lot of resources, you can bring in a lot of the right people and bridge that gap really well. What I see often that both corporations and startups try to do is they have somebody with a really strong technology background and somebody with a really strong real estate background, but neither one of them know how to talk to each other. And they try to build something, and it's like two people speaking completely different languages. It makes that process very, very difficult. I faced that on Wall Street. We tried to do it, and this is one of the reasons I jumped over to the technology side, is because I realized how difficult it is to bridge that gap between the two sides, especially when you're trying to look at more complex and sophisticated solutions.
I'm going to quickly jump in, and then Andy, go ahead. Your comment, Josh, on the granular, dirty data coming from a multitude of different sources being like one of the fundamental problems before you even start to overlay the more sophisticated solutions is exactly, it is ultimately an engineering challenge. And there's some really smart computer science teams that are trying to solve for that very problem, where how do you get data from number of different formats and try to cleanse it and put it in a format that then can be analyzed in one way for the asset manager. We have a company in France called Rest Solutions tackling that very problem. I'm sure there are many other tech companies around the world trying to solve for it, but it is a fundamental problem, but it is an engineering problem that is going to be solved.
That's where I disagree a little bit, is that much of the data that we've seen, at least, and that I've heard others work with, is just not produced in a way, it's not conveyed in a way that you can even make sense of. It doesn't matter how good the engineering talent is. And that goes back to, it's a real estate problem. There's a data problem, there's a fundamental problem with producing data for this industry that other industries have gotten better at. And you get to a wall where you say, I cannot make sense of the data that's been given. I cannot do that accurately. I might get to a place where I'm 75, 80% confident in that data. But if I plug a 75 or 80% level of confidence into another model where I have 10 or 20 other data sources that I'm also 75 or 80% confident in, I'm not confident in the outcomes of those models. And that's not a people problem. That's not that people are not smart enough. We often do not have the level of detail that we need. For example, if you're just doing an automated valuation model for single family homes, you can quantify maybe 60 or 70% of the inputs that go into that. But you can't quantify things like what is the view, what is the quality of the interior. A fireplace obviously adds value to a home, but is that fireplace a mundane fireplace or is it a really nice fireplace? Those two different types of fireplace will add different amounts of value to that home. And there's no way to get that information. So you can get to a level where you're somewhat confident. I have a decent range of what that value is, but without walking in that house, and even if you walk in that house and you see that fireplace, it's almost impossible to put a quantitative value on a continuous variable as to how much value that fireplace adds to that home or detracts from that home. So those are the problems that we start getting into, is you can get a lot of the way there, but because of the quality of the data and the availability of the data and the granularity of the data, we run into problems that we can put a model together, but we're not confident in that model because we know that we are missing a lot of the inputs that a human would consider when making that decision by walking through a property.
Happy to take it offline.
Sure.
And yeah,
let's talk about it now. We want more arguments. We want
it's
more debate.
It's hard to argue with something which is true, that data has been a pain point for the industry for many years before even PropTech emerged. So again, I still remember the days when you see the term and you don't really know what definition any particular developer or asset manager used, be it yield, net yield, triple net, like warm leases. Like in Germany, that means one thing, in the UK another. So quite frankly, there are a lot of startups that are now act as data aggregators, and they build open APIs for the next startup that then is able to analyze this data and feed that back. And this way, the two systems, they kind of mutually sort of they cross-pollinate each other in terms of data points, but it's still going to take a bit of time. I would also get back us to their fundamental issues of real estate, to kind of back us on track where we may disagree, because on data points it's hard to disagree. To address a couple of things which Abigail raised. So first was, if I remember well, on scale-ups and whether it's possible, like how easy it is to scale businesses. And I'm extremely thankful for that question, because in fact, I realized that I completely skipped an introduction of my company. So Reach UK, we scale up technology startups globally. So we are a global platform. We originated in the US, now expanded into the UK, Canada, and Australia. And quite frankly, I have to say that those businesses that operate within pure tech software space, they are actually quite straightforward to scale, as long as kind of there is no language barrier at the very least. But now, what I also advise a lot of our startups that I get to meet, okay, quite often startups, they start mixing, and not only like it's often a mixture of software and hardware, but then also a lot of startups have temptation to enter the real estate market and start actually buying assets on balance sheet. And that's where it becomes a little bit challenging, but that's where it's hard. Again, it's not PropTech to blame. Sometimes it's a business model to blame. So what I advise heavily to those is not to mix two asset two risk profiles. So technology and real estate are completely different assets. So if you speak technology and you talk to software, in fact, it's not uncommon to see the company and startup being based out of one location and actually scale globally without even hiring the team in the overseas locations, and doing that still quite successfully. Yes, they do end up working around the clock, so sometimes they have to take calls at 3 a.m. But that's all. That's the biggest barrier for scaling up. So I would kind of distinguish between different types of technology startups. And then the second point on the adoption skills of the real estate industry, and that being a barrier that a lot of education is needed. Of course, yes, absolutely. I cannot agree more that it requires certain effort from the real estate industry, and that effort you need to have enough incentive to start trying new solution. And here I'm going to address what I think is an elephant in the room, which we've been just through the biggest experiment of our lives called COVID, lockdowns, and this actually prompted real estate to start looking for solutions within the PropTech, which is awesome. So that's where real estate industry has no choice but start adopting and learning technology and tech solutions, how those could be implemented. And the fundamental issues that real estate have got because of COVID is their flexible working, which is now going to stay with us. And I'm not talking working from home, just sort of working from anywhere. So how are you going to, as a tenant, as a landlord, are you going to allow that? And there's a lot of solutions emerging and a lot of interest from the real estate industry and willingness to adopt and learn about those solutions. And second is, of course, real estate repurposing. And that's where we need a lot of data. And that, George, coming back to your point, that's where real estate is actually incentivized to give this data in the most appropriate format. Because when we talk offices or where it's even worse, retail, that's where real estate industry is now at a loss. So what do I do with my high street shop and high street portfolio when the occupancy is at unacceptable levels? I've got to actually analyze data to understand how the footfall looks like. What do I actually do with this building, which is now no longer tenanted? Again, that's both retail and offices. And then as a developer, I have a lot of questions. So what do I develop on this land floor? So a lot of talks now is such that you've got to kind of do mixed use developments and more of those, because now people are willing to minimize their commute. So that means that they need to have office and community center somewhere nearby where they live. So all of that questions, they're hungry for data, and they're hungry for data analytics. So that's why real estate, I can see that being forced to supply this data to software startups who are able to kind of present and give definitive answers. So COVID definitely kind of was an accelerator to adoption, and that's good news.
I'm aware we spent a lot of time debating why PropTech will or won't be applied within the real estate industry, and we've moved away from the fact that what is it actually addressing these issues. There's a lot of questions in there, but there's one question in particular that's been put forward that I quite like, and it's around the usage of real estate. We have homelessness, we have poverty, and we have thousands of empty buildings. We're talking about this huge vacancy in real estate. How is PropTech trying to address these questions of usage? And more specifically for me, I'd like to understand that how can it help with the housing shortage, the global housing shortage, which I think is one of the pressing issues that from the commercial lens that we've taken this debate through, we've kind of skipped over. We'll have just a quick one or two comments from each side, and then we'll have a summary and wrap up the debate. So Faisal.
I can very quickly go. So I think if you were to speak to one of our founders, Johnny Britton, who's the founder of LandTech, he's a total evangelist of this cause of using data and data analytics to unlock more land for development, to build more houses, to address the housing shortage. And his whole company has been built around the vision of using data analytics to really fast track the due diligence and acquisition of new land by developers so that they can ultimately get on to doing what they do best, which is building homes. And that company's gone from 2 people when we backed them to about 100 people and rapidly growing, built around this one vision. So there definitely are great startups out there that started with a social vision and have built a great commercially viable and scalable business off the back of that.
From my end, I'm just going to go with a couple of examples that are within our portfolio at Reach UK. So we have such company as Property Inspect, and what they do, they help with digital and remote inspections and how it plays into, and that's somewhat a low-hanging fruit for them because they use technology to facilitate rapid homeless rehousing in the US. And how they've done it, like without this technology, this rehousing would have taken too long and would have been like a little bit expensive, more expensive than it needs to be. And with the digital solution, they are able to quickly issue certificates that a particular home is suitable for homeless rehousing. So it's almost a checklist, and anyone, tenant, can quickly do this with the help of an app. And that ultimately plays into this kind of category of housing shortage. Another example would be the company called Under the Doormat within our portfolio. So they are in the UK. So what they do, they first of all, during COVID, they use their network of homes to house NHS staff for free. But ultimately, they're all about short-term rentals and utilizing underutilized residential stock. So when the property is for too long not been sold, or developer just built it and they haven't yet had time to find its buyers for every particular flat, they can quickly with their software arrange and get this property on a short-term rental market, and it's managed by through the software as well. So it's a little bit more than just Airbnb. And then again, it's just being able to house hundreds of frontline staff for free. It played into this fundamental issue of real estate.
I'll jump to Abigail or Josh for the final say on the housing piece, and then we can have a final word from each of us.
I mean, they all sound like really interesting examples that Faisal and Valentina have raised. I mean, I would say from my perspective, I haven't seen a huge mobilization of PropTech into trying to solve that issue. And I do still think that, you know, largely PropTech is lots and lots mobilizing around some of the same issues that are maybe slightly easier to solve, but where they can see a kind of quicker route to market and addressing some of these more fundamental issues, maybe we haven't seen as much of, but you know, hopefully we will see more emerging. What I have been surprised about is not to have maybe seen more innovation in that construction stage. So looking at low carbon, modular type construction, maybe even bringing 3D printing. I think there's been, I've heard lots of talk at that at different times and haven't really seen it kind of emerge as one of those, you know, big things. Maybe it's one of those things where people always say, you know, you overestimate what's going to happen in 2 years and underestimate what's going to happen in 10 years. So maybe it's an issue like that, where in a decade's time we'll be seeing low carbon modular construction of affordable net zero carbon housing in scale everywhere, but that's an area that it's, you know, doesn't seem to have yet that I can see been a huge mobilization of PropTech around.
I would agree with Abigail. I haven't seen a lot because it's a huge problem to solve. It's a very difficult problem to solve. There's a lot of different players involved. Governments are going to have to be heavily involved in that. There's also something that called Javan's paradox, where you do something to increase the efficiency of something, but that efficiency also increases the demand of it. So let's say we found some way to lower the price of housing in Manhattan or London. What would that do? That would increase the demand for that. And when you have increased demand for a finite supply, then prices go right back up and you get back to where you were before. I don't think these solutions of trying to cut costs and trying to get cheaper land are going to solve the problem in the long term. I think there has to be a completely fundamental. One idea that was raised for New York was improving the transportation. If it takes you an hour to get into the city because you're living in New Jersey or Long Island or Westchester, then you're more likely to be willing to pay higher prices to live in the city and closer to your work. But If there was much better mass transportation that took you 15 minutes to get into work, then you'd be more willing to live out in places where living was cheaper and would reduce the demand of the demand for housing within city centers. So I don't think that the types of cost-cutting measures and looking for better ways to produce these properties or provide financing and incentives to lower prices a little bit is going to be a long-term solution to the problem that we have.
Or we all just get technology that allows us to video conference from home and we don't have to go to work at all. I'm gonna quickly just summarize. I really wanted to take a vote of participants whose side they sat on in the debate, but without that availability, I'm going to summarize where I think the debate has ended up, and then I want to come to each of you in turn, because I know I've made you sit on a certain side of the debate, to kind of give your true feelings forward and you know, give just a 1 minute discussion on perhaps my summary, whether you agree or disagree. I will have to give it to Valentina and Faisal, I think, for me, in that I believe PropTech is addressing the fundamental issues of real estate. However, it's looking at the low-hanging, short-term, and the smaller the issues that are creating financial viability. And the market itself is very early and young, and perhaps it's going to take a lot of time and a lot more investment before these fundamental issues are solved. So it's addressing them, but it isn't yet solving them. I think that Josh really came to the fore by saying that these real problems will only be solved once there is this huge investment into specific research development and this data availability, because what the industry wants is disruptive tech. And so it feels that PropTech is so far only sustaining existing ways rather than changing full new paradigm shifts. Whether that change comes from within the industry or outside, in the same way, you know, smartphones and the internet have completely disrupted everything in real estate, will such a transition perhaps in, you know, in blockchain data availability or acceptance, or a new climate take-back technology, will one of these developments impact the industry more so than any internal PropTech is yet to be seen. But you know, I think I side with Faisal and Valentina that it is addressing, but I also side with Abigail and Josh that there is a lot more that needs to be done before it solves the fundamental issues.
You also work for Faisal, so I call a conflict of interest there. I want an appeal and a recount.
Fair enough. Well, it's my vote counts one, and it's and I'll let you go each in turn then, just to, you don't have to wear your for and against hat. You can now just kind of put your views and air your grievances with PropTech and the real estate industry and hope for the future. I'll start with Faisal.
Yeah, I'll end with a slightly more conciliatory note. It's not really a PropTech versus property. I really do believe that these fundamental issues, you know, be it the housing shortage or sustainability or worker well-being, will be solved through collaboration between the bricks and mortar world and the technology world. And I just want to remind everyone that the building blocks of innovation is not necessarily code, it's people. And ultimately, the reason why I believe the real estate industry can't solve the problem on its own is because if you just take a look at who works in the industry right now, it's a largely homogenous bunch. There are people, at least in the UK, that went to the same 3 schools, be it Reading or Oxford Brookes or Cass, and have gone through the same RICS training, through the same agents, and they kind of have a very samey type of homogenous lens through which they view the world. And that's not a bad thing, but there is the diversity there is lacking. But then you bring the PropTech world, you have people that have come from travel and hospitality, they've come from engineering, they've come from design, they're challenging the status quo, they're building all kinds of groundbreaking new technologies. You actually need these 2 different types of people rubbing shoulders to come up with the ideas, the platforms, the technologies that will help the real estate industry kind of enter the next phase of its evolution. So I really don't think the innovation is down to the code base, it's down to the people. The real estate industry currently is a pretty homogenous bunch, and you need to collaborate with the PropTech world in order to achieve these big outcomes that we're all hopefully we'll work together to achieve over the next decade or so.
Great. Abigail?
Yeah, I mean, I think I largely agree with your summary, Andy, and with a lot of what Faisal had to say as well. I think that there is huge potential in PropTech to address some of these fundamental issues. But I think Valentina made a really good point earlier when she said, it's just the stage that we're at, where there is, it's not a mature industry yet, and there's a long way to go. And I 100% agree that collaboration, and within that collaboration, greater diversity of thought is the key. So it's about a learning process that the whole industry has to go on and have to look at some of these fundamental issues in a different way. And I do think that PropTech has a really important role to play in that. Certainly hasn't solved any of the fundamental issues yet, but definitely does have the potential to do so.
Go to Josh.
So I'll agree with Faisal completely. There has to be more collaboration, and it has to be done in a very smart way, where you get the right kind of people in the room solving problems in the right way. You have to have people that know the problems that need to be solved, and people that can write the code to actually solve those problems. I do believe there's lots of potential. I think we're all in the same boat with that, and we've dedicated our careers to it. So we agree that it's there. I think that I disagree a little bit in the way that it's being done. I think corporations need to take a much bigger lead. The established real estate companies need to take a much bigger lead, transform their cultures to be more technology friendly and accepting of the innovation risks, the risks that come along with innovation, the process that comes with developing technology and innovating and developing new capabilities. Thus far, the industry themselves have talked a lot about it, but in my opinion, have not done a lot in the right way to accomplish that.
Great. Finally, Valentina.
And I'm very much in the camp where effective demand creates supply. And by effective, I mean it. There needs to be budgets within real estate. There needs to be willingness to adopt. I'm glad to see that real estate has awakened over the past 12 months, was forced to awaken. So this trend is there. And I would be curious to meet again in a year's time and see where we are on their adoption and technology curve.
I would love to host this panel again. So hopefully at the 2022 conference, I can have the same 4 people back and we can actually revisit all these. Thank you everyone for your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get through them, but it was I really wanted to spark a heated debate. Josh, Faisal, we would love to see this taken offline. We want to be a part of that. So if I can moderate that and we can get participants to watch that, then more than happy to do so. Finally, Abigail, Faisal, Josh, Valentina, thank you so much for your time. And thank you everyone for tuning in to this event. So,
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay.